You were raised to believe that generosity is a virtue, that offering your time, assistance, and energy freely is what makes you a good person. That kindness is the path to growth, that what you give will eventually return to you. But Machiavelli didn't buy into karma, he believed in leverage. And he grasped something few are willing to admit. The world doesn't reward your generosity, it observes it. Because when you give too quickly, too often, too freely, it doesn't generate gratitude, it signals accessibility. And constant accessibility breeds entitlement. Left unchecked, entitlement transforms the generous into a resource to be exploited, not a person to be honored. Let's be blunt. Let's be real. How many times have you supported someone only for them to vanish when you needed help? How often have you bent over backward to ease someone else's burden, only to be dismissed once you stop giving? How many times have you thought, they'll remember what I did for them, but they didn't? Machiavelli would argue you weren't being kind, you were miscalculating, because you gave without power. And in the realm of influence, giving without power is surrendering control. This is why Machiavelli cautioned leaders never to be generous too soon in their reign. He knew that generosity isn't merely an offering, it's a message. It teaches others how to treat you, what to expect from you, and what they stand to lose if they walk away. When you give before establishing strength, you signal subservience. And once that narrative is fixed, no boundary you set later can completely undo it. The core issue? Most people assume that generosity earns them connection. But in Machiavellian terms, generosity doesn't earn, it costs. Especially if the context, delivery, or timing is off. Let's unpack the psychology behind it, starting with a vital principle. Unconditional giving breeds conditional respect. You believe that giving with no strings attached makes you noble. But that's a myth, because expectations are always formative, not by you, then by those watching you. They see how quickly you say yes, how often you drop everything to help, how easily you downplay your own needs. And what starts as admiration rapidly morphs into entitlement. They stop thanking you. They begin expecting it. Your time and energy no longer seem like offerings, they appear as debts. And once that shift happens, there's no easy way to return. So what would Machiavelli do? He'd say, generosity must be earned and it must come at a cost. Not to you, but to them. Because people cherish what they must work for. They respect what requires effort. They stay committed to what isn't handed out carelessly. Your support, your time, your help shouldn't be endlessly available. It should be protected so that when you finally extend it, it lands like a rare gift, not a recurring gesture. And here's where it becomes even riskier. Once people see you as consistently generous, they begin to test your limits, not necessarily out of cruelty, but simply because they know they can. They start to test the limits. They ask for just a little extra. They say, just this once. They guilt trip you or flatter you just enough to keep you compliant. This is the exact vulnerability Machiavelli warned against when your virtue becomes your liability. Because once people realize they can sway your decisions with praise, guilt, or charm, the respect vanishes. You're no longer a peer. You're being handled. And in every kind of relationship, whether intimate, professional, or social, the moment you consistently give more than you receive, the dynamic shifts. It's rarely dramatic. It slips in with a smile, a compliment, a casual, thank you, you're amazing, and you mistake that for loyalty. But to a Machiavellian, that's just confirmation you've become the easy mark. The one who never says no. The one who's expected to stretch too far. The giver without boundaries. The one who gives to everyone, even the unworthy. That's not noble, it's quiet self-destruction. Let's dig even deeper. There's another psychological turn that happens when generosity is unchecked, especially in group settings. The more you offer, the less you're valued. Sounds counterintuitive, but that's how group psychology works. In team discussions, you go above and beyond. They start expecting it. Among friends, you give heartfelt advice. You're now their unpaid therapist. In romantic partnerships, you carry the emotional weight. And before long, no one even notices the effort anymore. Generosity that becomes constant turns into background noise, and anything invisible can't be respected. Machiavelli would put it plainly, the true seat of power lies not in what is given, but in what is withheld. Because the person who can say no is the one who captures attention. The one who gives only when asked, only after others prove their merit, only when it creates impact, that's the one who commands respect. You want people to value your kindness? Then stop leading with it. Make them earn your presence. Let them show initiative. Let them prove they're worthy. Only then do you extend your generosity. That's not cruelty, it's refined respect. And respect is the cornerstone of lasting influence. This is where most decent people lose the game before they even know they're playing. They see restraint as manipulation. They think postponing help is insincere. But Machiavelli understood human nature better. He knew people treasure what they must pursue, dismiss what is handed to them without cost. So if your warmth is met with neglect, if your generosity only brings more taking, if your support has turned you into an invisible supporting role in your own life, then the issue isn't your kindness. It's that you never used it strategically. And Machiavelli would say, it's not too late to fix it, but the shift must begin with one clear change. Stop giving simply because it feels noble. Start giving only when it serves your power. The most dangerous illusion about generosity is how virtuous it feels. You tell yourself, I'm being the better person. You think your generosity builds lasting connections, that it strengthens loyalty, that people will recall, they were there for me when no one else was. But Machiavelli would scoff at that belief because he understood the stark, emotionless reality of human memory. Kindness, when it's on tap, isn't remembered. It's only noticed when it's withdrawn. When your giving is constant, unchecked, and unmeasured, you fade into the background, always present, endlessly reachable, invisible. And when people take your presence for granted, your absence loses meaning. Here's where it turns even more insidious. The more consistent your generosity, the more likely people will grow bitter when it ends. You might expect them to say, they gave so much already. But instead, they ask, why now? Or worse, they've changed. They might even say, so it was never unconditional? Because people rarely count what you've given. They only register the absence of what they assumed was rightfully theirs. That's the Machiavellian twist. Your kindness doesn't inspire appreciation. It breeds reliance. And dependence, without boundaries, morphs into entitlement. And entitled people, they lash out when their access is revoked. This is why Machiavelli cautioned rulers to avoid generosity that brings neither honor nor gratitude. So what's the move? You begin to use absence as a weapon. When others have come to rely on your validation, your help, your presence, you step back. Not to punish, but to make visible what they've been blind to. You don't offer an explanation. You don't justify. You simply fall quiet. And that silence, that stillness, it speaks louder than any confrontation. It reminds them of the value they overlooked. It creates an emptiness that reveals what they'd taken for granted. You've rewritten the dynamic. You're no longer a silent fixture in the background. Now, you're a presence they must re-earn. But this only works when you grasp one key lesson about generosity. Timing is everything. Machiavelli never advised withholding forever. He advised being feared before being embraced. Because if people respect your limits early on, if they recognize your attention and time are earned, not guaranteed, then your generosity becomes something unforgettable. Something that binds, not weakens. It's not about stinginess, it's about control before kindness. Let's go even further. Because there's a subtle trap that even powerful people fall into. Performing generosity to prove worth. You're in a crowd. Someone asks for help. No one volunteers. So you step in, offer time, effort, energy, hoping to be seen as indispensable. And at first, it works. People come to rely on you. You're the dependable one. But slowly, the perception shifts. You're no longer powerful, you're practical. You're not respected, you're required. In Machiavellian language, utility without scarcity becomes servitude. The minute people perceive you as eternally available, your role slides from respected leader to reliable tool. They may flatter you, they may compliment you, but they don't fear losing you. And the second they stop fearing your absence, you've already been devalued. So here's the turning point. You don't establish your worth through constant giving. You prove it by becoming irreplaceable. And nothing cements that faster than the courage to walk away from those who see you as merely a resource. That's the Machiavellian move. No need for confrontation. No need to demand recognition. You simply withdraw and let your absence echo louder than any explanation could. Now, let's uncover one of the most manipulative dynamics that your generosity attracts: the professional leech. This is the individual who thrives on your tendency to overextend. They don't openly ask, they imply. They don't make demands, they suggest. They offer just enough praise to keep you agreeable. They'll say things like, "You're always so giving, I knew I could count on you." And with that one sentence, they fuse your identity with your accessibility. Decline, and suddenly you're not who they thought you were. And because your sense of self is rooted in being generous, you give even more. You continue to help even when it drains you, even when they haven't earned it. And Machiavelli wouldn't blame them for taking advantage, he'd blame you for being available. Because a leech only survives when the host tolerates it. If you want to hold real power, you need to stop being so easily consumed. So how do you reclaim it? You disrupt the pattern. You start testing the people who've become accustomed to your generosity. Offer help in part, then stop. Extend a favor, but ask for reciprocity. Observe their reaction when your energy comes with conditions. If they pull away, go silent, act wounded or withdrawn, you've identified them. Not as enemies, but as individuals who valued your function, not your kindness. This isn't about becoming harsh, it's about becoming tactical. Machiavelli's strategy wasn't based on looking kind, it was about directing kindness with precision. Who gets it, when, and why. Once you master those three factors, you're no longer a mark. You become the rare force no one dares presume upon. When your generosity turns into an expectation, it stops being a gift. It morphs into an unspoken contract you never signed. And from that point on, each time you delay, every time you set a limit, each time you choose yourself, you're not seen as setting boundaries. You're perceived as being selfish. That's the paradox. The more consistently you give, the less permission you have to withhold, because you've trained people to see yes as your default mode. Machiavelli would call this a failure of strategic positioning, because now your worth isn't measured by what you give, it's judged by the disruptions in your giving. You're not admired for your contributions. You're punished for every pause. And that is how power erodes. Not through betrayal or grand losses, but through repeated, predictable availability. You teach people to count on you, and what is counted on too often becomes taken for granted. And then, here's what unfolds next. People start commenting on your boundaries like it's a personality shift. She's not like she used to be. He was more helpful before. They've changed. Yet no one brings up how much you've poured out. No one counts the fatigue, the silent sacrifices, the mental cost. All they notice is that their easy access has been disrupted. That's why Machiavelli never acted without intention. He didn't trust in selfless acts, because every act sends a message, and every message either strengthens your influence or weakens it. And what your unchecked generosity has likely been signaling is this: I'm always available. I expect nothing in return. But that kind of giving doesn't raise your status. It relegates you to a supporting character. And Machiavelli would challenge you. Do you want to lead your story, or just play a role in someone else's? Let's get analytical. Let's break down how your habitual generosity conditions people to overlook you. It typically unfolds in 3 stages. Stage 1. Admiration. Initially, they're impressed. You're dependable, giving, attentive. You make their lives smoother. They say you're remarkable, unique, and it feels affirming. But the truth is, they're not admiring you. They're admiring how they benefit from your efforts. They're hooked on the outcome, not the person. Stage 2. Assimilation. They begin structuring their routines around your help. They grow to count on it, plan around it. It's no longer extraordinary, it's assumed. You're no longer seen as a thoughtful human, you've become part of the infrastructure. Stage 3. Devaluation. The moment you hesitate, reduce your effort, or ask for reciprocity, they don't respond with empathy. They react with annoyance. Why? Because their expectations have been disrupted. Machiavelli would describe this as the erosion of perceived authority. When you give without limits and then pause, people don't respect the boundary, they resent the change, because they never believed you could walk away. So, how do you reset the dynamic? You restructure the narrative. You stop offering until the relationship proves its depth. You observe before you commit. You wait to be asked. And then you respond thoughtfully, deliberately. You don't drop everything. You don't jump at every call. Instead, you use phrases like, "Let me see what I can do," or "I'll have to check if it fits my priorities," or "I'll think it over and get back to you." Calm, polite, firm. These responses serve a key purpose. They signal that your time and energy are self-governed, that your availability is earned, not assumed. This is exactly how Machiavelli would maintain influence without creating conflict through controlled detachment, because he understood one truth: distance builds value. Easy access destroys it. Now, let's flip the focus. The harshest consequence of unchecked generosity isn't external, it's internal. You begin to feel uneasy when you protect your own space. You struggle to rest even when you're drained. You start equating your worth with how much you do for others. You grow uncomfortable being on the receiving end even when you're in need. This is how the self-erasure mindset takes root, and Machiavelli would call it the ultimate forfeiture of personal authority. You've become a sovereign who finances others and burdens yourself. So it's time to reconstruct your identity, one where your worth isn't measured by what you constantly offer, but by what you reserve with intention. Saying no isn't rebellion, it's a reminder to yourself and others that your generosity is a choice, not an obligation. You guard your energy not from selfishness, but from the awareness that overgiving makes your strength disposable. You tolerate the discomfort. You let people misread you, question your shift, assume you've changed. Because here's the truth. Power always looks like arrogance to those who benefited from your passivity. And Machiavelli would smirk at that. Because when they say, "You've changed," what they really mean is, "You've stopped being convenient." And that's progress. It means they're finally recognizing your generosity for what it should have always been. A deliberate act, not a default setting. A reflection of your strength, not your submission. And now, when you choose to give, it feels different because it's scarce. It's valuable. It reminds them that earning your favor is not effortless. There comes a tipping point when those who once depended on your automatic support, who assumed your time had no limits, begin to sense the change. Not because you announced it, but because you simply withdrew. That stillness, that silence, it's where real respect is born. Machiavelli wouldn't plead for recognition. He wouldn't justify pulling back. He would let the absence speak. Because that's how real power works. It invites reflection. And if that reflection never comes, then you've just discovered who never truly valued your giving in the first place. Here's the final Machiavellian principle. True power lies not in your willingness to give, but in your ability to say no. When others assume they're entitled to your energy, your presence, your support, your strongest strategy isn't confrontation. It's scarcity. It's making your generosity something rare, something that must be earned, not demanded. Something meaningful when delivered, not something that fills gaps because you're uncomfortable with refusal. So let's get practical. Here's a framework Machiavelli would stand behind. The three-step model for power-conscious generosity. Step 1. Delay the gift. Don't respond immediately. Introduce a pause. Whether it's a favor, a request for attention, or emotional support, create space. Why? Because urgency trains people to believe they control your time. A simple response like, "I'll think it over and follow up tomorrow," or "Let me sit with this," or "I'm working through other priorities right now," adds a necessary layer of friction. Friction disrupts entitlement. It forces people to rethink their tone and to question whether they're treating you like a partner or like a resource. Second, evaluate the exchange. Before you give, ask yourself a brutally honest question. What does this individual bring to the table in return? It doesn't need to be transactional in the shallow sense, but it must be reciprocal. Do they speak well of you when you're not present? Do they offer emotional steadiness, loyalty, perspective, genuine effort? Do they match your presence when you're running low? If the answer is no, then giving isn't generosity. It's a gradual erosion of your self-worth. Machiavelli wouldn't label withholding as selfish, he'd call it sovereign control. Because when you extend yourself without balance, you're not engaging in healthy connection. You're enabling your own exploitation. Third, signal value without announcing it. This is where influence turns into elegance. You still give, but with precision and rarity. When you offer something, it's intentional, limited, and given only after the person proves they're deserving. You support, but without setting a future precedent. You lend a hand, but not before they've attempted to solve their own problem. And most critically, you never declare your generosity. Your actions speak, and your silence underlines the message. Because once you stop being constantly accessible, people become more attuned to your presence. They lean in, pay attention, wait for your words. They begin to approach with more care, with altered tone, posture, and energy. You've taught them not by force, but by withdrawal. Not through commands, but through selective kindness. This is how rulers behave. It's how Machiavelli would maneuver through a world filled with opportunists dressed as allies. And here's perhaps the most freeing realization. You owe no one an explanation for your shift. You don't need to justify your boundaries. Those who truly value you will recognize the change and recalibrate. Those who complain, they never appreciated you to begin with. They weren't thankful, just entitled, and your quiet distance has pulled off their mask. Now comes the final inversion. When your generosity becomes infrequent, it gains worth. When it becomes valuable, it becomes sought after. And once it's desired, others begin to work for the privilege of receiving it. You're no longer chasing recognition, they're chasing proximity. That is the ultimate Machiavellian evolution. From the giver who's drained to the authority who decides, from someone used to someone whose favor now holds weight, admiration, and fear. Not because you became cold, but because you finally recognized that generosity was never supposed to define you. It was always meant to be your sharpest, rarest, most unforgettable weapon, delivered rarely, applied with purpose, remembered forever.